Right now, I am doing research for my second book and an article that I'm writing for um, the Texas Historical Society. And one of the books that I am using is Jon Meacham's "And There Was Light." Now, qualifying this with the fact that awards mean something to me. Um, Accomplishments, scholarly accomplishments mean something to me. I know some people it doesn't. I'm still at that level where it does. So I'm going to preface what I'm saying with the fact that Jon Meacham is a Pulitzer Prize winning author, a successful historian, and has accomplished many things I am attempting to accomplish that I have not done. So, putting that into perspective, I have some criticisms that in no way do I mean to disparage him, his intellect, his historical ability. I believe that there are many reasons that this particular occurrence happens that I found in his work, research, and book. When it deals with Lincoln history, and I actually covered in my dissertation. In fact, that was the primary theme of my dissertation. And within is the effect that the Lincoln story has made on historians, American popular culture, scholarship, and American history broadly. That kind of like how in a Christian country, the Bible is generally considered correct and good. And anything that you study in the Bible is coming from that reference point that this is from a qualified source that is good, to the point that many people don't question if the source itself is qualified and good. So we may debate the stories, but the Bible itself is good. That's kind of how the story of Lincoln is. That Lincoln was a good person, that Lincoln was anti-slavery, he was an egalitarian, he saw an egalitarian, just the fact that he was not a racist. Because you'll find in history, and this is something I find in Jon Meacham's style of writing and presentation of Lincoln, is historians will clearly state he was not an egalitarian, he was not an abolitionist. But then everything they write describes an egalitarian or an equalitarian or even an abolitionist. Now, one thing that I do notice, and again, I don't know that this is on purpose, but I do know the information that they have access to does not support some of the broad statements that are being made about Lincoln and his goodness toward all people, and particularly Black people. It just wasn't so. And that doesn't make him a bad person. It just makes it, that's just who he was. So my question comes about, what is this dedication beyond facts, beyond primary sources, beyond peer review, that this preserved image of Lincoln is a necessity in the field of history, in the culture of America at large? Um, it's done different ways. I found in Skip Gates' book, he explained how Lincoln was this image of Lincoln is to be maintained by how Lincoln categorized things, and his ability to categorize things made him, it kind of excused some of the primary sources. It's kind of like how science in the Bible tend to work, where at one point the world was made in 6 days and stars would fall out of the sky, and it was an obvious thing that the people in that time did not understand science. And as science began to advance, they just reinterpreted the biblical text, and oh well, what they meant was this, or this was metaphorical, or this was this. So it became a rescinding reality based on what science could explain. Whereas it was science at one point, then it began to rescind. That's kind of how the story of Lincoln is. It's like, okay, as we get more information, as we get more primary sources, we begin to, well, Lincoln didn't really mean that, or yeah, he said that, but then he did this and that made it different. The story of Lincoln keeps morphing, but just like the Bible does not become judged as a text, the story of Lincoln does not get judged as a text. The end result is always true. The Bible is good. Lincoln is this wonderful, wonderful person to everyone. Edna Medford, in her book, Lincoln and Emancipation, focused on Lincoln growing over time. And that's something you're going to find, be it Eric Foner, Burlingame, Meacham, Matthew Norman. They all talk about how Lincoln grew. Now you got to understand, Lincoln was in his 50s when he became president. Think about people you know. Most people don't grow in their 50s. They do not become somebody else. They don't take on new they don't take on new ideologies. You pretty much know who you are, and you are who you are, and your life has formed your worldview. It just didn't make sense that he would grow because of, Foner would say, interaction with Negro leaders, Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth. Also, he would say interaction with Foner and I believe Meacham said, not Meacham. Well, I don't want to put a name on that one. There's also claims that the heroism of the Black soldiers caused a change in Lincoln. And some say that he grew over time because he felt that he was a slave to his father. But the primary sources just don't support that. It just don't. He was very consistent. Since the 1840s, he felt aligned with his mentor Henry Clay. Just ship all the Black people out of the country, and then that's a problem we don't have anymore. And when he became president, that's what he made his priority. He got Congress to fund it. The same day he signed the Emancipation Proclamation, he signed a contract to start shipping Black people to an island outside of Haiti. As recent as 1864, he was still involved in what they call colonization, but it was just removal of Black people in the country. And up to 4 days before his assassination, he was speaking to a colleague about bringing back colonization now that he had won his second term, to revisit colonization and see if they could remove Black folks out of the country. So he was very consistent. He played politics, but as of the things that he said and did, he generally was pretty much straightforward, especially things that he did not have to negotiate on. And the Civil War was not an altruistic war in any way. The North was not fighting for Black people. The South was not fighting for Black people. The only people that fought for Black people in the Civil War were Black people. So Black people actually freed themselves. That is where that comes from. And this is undeniable, because the Battle of Vicksburg and the Battle of Gettysburg and the subsequent battles did not occur until 1863. In 1863 is when Black people entered the Civil War. Black people fought. Black people fought in those pivotal battles that shifted the battles into the favor of the North. Because as of January 1863, the North was slightly behind in the battles. So when you're reading Meacham's work, to see these subjective passages with the proper information. So it's not like I have found some information that Meacham doesn't know. But when I read, offered the opportunity to save the Union and avoid war by making concessions to slavery, Lincoln refused. Urged to abandon emancipation to increase his chances of re-election in 1864, he declined. Now, that is suggestive. And I know, you got to have some context to that, but just for the video's sake, I'm just giving you some pieces. Just for the video's sake, I'm just giving you some pieces. Offered the opportunity to save the Union to avoid war by making concessions to slavery. Lincoln never did not make concessions to slavery. He said, leave it where it is. He said, I don't necessarily personally believe in slavery, but it's protected by the Constitution. So let's leave it where it is, and let's build an economy bigger that can go in the West. But let's let that stay there, and it'll probably die out on its own. But if it doesn't, if it takes 100 years, it takes 100 years. So this wasn't, as soon as I can strike this down, I'm going to. Even if he had said something like that, that's not what he did. He was president of the United States. That was never part of his agenda. That was never part of any of his legislation. All of his legislation protected slavery in some way. So to say that he resisted the opportunity to save the Union and avoid war by making concessions to slavery. That's not true. That's not true. He made concessions to slavery by allowing it to remain in the border states. He made concessions to slavery when he put out the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation saying, the only way I'm going to do this is if you don't stop resisting. But if you stop resisting, you can come back and you can have your slaves. That's a concession. Of all of the topics, all of the quotes Lincoln made, this was a quote that really was unnecessary, but Jon Meacham found important. Cowardice, moral cowardice is something which I never had. One thing I want to point out, and I know I'm jumping around, but it's a video. I'm just getting it out because these videos actually help me with my writing. He's a Pulitzer Prize writer, which I respect. That is a big deal. I noticed that anti-slavery is not defined by Meacham. Morality is not defined by Meacham. Abolitionist is not defined by Meacham. Egalitarian is not defined by Meacham. And unfortunately, people can use these words interchangeably. Egalitarian, equalitarian, anti-slavery, abolitionist. And they're not. I could be an abolitionist, but not be an equalitarian. I can be an egalitarian, but not an abolitionist. If I don't think that Black people are people, I can be seen as an egalitarian. And it depends on who's looking at me. If I'm for women, let's take Susan B. Anthony and all of the suffrage leaders, white suffrage leaders that used Black women, Sojourner Truth, Ida B. Wells, Harriet Tubman, used their popularity to bolster their argument. And then in 1920 rights, they spent the next 20 years fighting for Black women to not have the same rights. To people looking at them, those women were egalitarians. They felt that everyone that they saw as people in society should have the same rights. But if I'm a white supremacist and an egalitarian, I only see egalitarianism within my group. So these things aren't the same. And if I am using these terms, they can be misinterpreted favorably. Yes, Lincoln was technically anti-slavery, but he wasn't an abolitionist. He didn't mind the slavery staying there. In theory, he disagreed with it, but in practice, it could be there. And enough representations or misrepresentations like this leads us to a reader having these subtle, positive cues of the traditional understanding of Lincoln, that he would not bend for slavery. The reason why he wouldn't bend towards slavery is because he had to take the financial support system of the rebels away so they never could do it again. That was why. It was not, it wasn't that he was an abolitionist. It was not that he said many times that he was a white supremacist. White supremacist wasn't the word there, but he said, hey, if somebody's got to have a supreme role, I take it to be my people. When he talked to black people, he said, your people and my people. He didn't say we as Americans. He just didn't. So this book has a different style that I'm noticing than Foner or Medford or the other Lincoln historians. Is a subtle play on undefined words that is constantly maintaining a positive edge. Even if I'm saying something bad, I'm going to follow it with a word, morality. Which morality is relevant to the people he was leading in slavery. Was he moral to the Native Americans that he was actively removing? Was he moral to the mass hanging of the Dakota Native Americans? Was he moral to the women that he never mentioned that couldn't participate in society? But you see in this book that it's moral, it's moral, it's moral, it's moral. Moral is really relative. But it's this desire for historic America to have this symbol, because Lincoln's story became the story of America's redemption, particular white America's redemption. And to attack that story, you attack the virtue of the country. But to maintain that story, you maintain the virtue of the country. And I think that may be part of the popularity of Pulitzer. That does not mean he's not an excellent writer. That does not mean he's not an excellent researcher. I'm saying that there are things that are blatantly, I'm not going to say misinterpreted, but interpreted aligned with popular thought. And not only is the author doing it, these books, this work, this is a scholar. These works are peer reviewed. You don't get to Pulitzer level without it being peer reviewed. So that means everybody else who knows the things that I've just said, Lincoln Douglas debate, Lincoln's legislation, Lincoln's address on colonization, Lincoln's dedication to colonization, all of this stuff, Lincoln's preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, his confiscation, discussed his Confiscation Acts, his Emancipation Proclamation, how the 13th Amendment itself still provides and protects slavery. Lincoln moved slavery from the private sector to the public sector. The judiciary determines who is and who is not a slave. Look at the 13th Amendment right now and read it. Except if it's being by punishable of where you've been duly convicted. Who convicts? Duly convicted. Who convicts? Judges in the judiciary. I am lost in how this whole and it's not just this book, how this whole is missed in scholarship.